The Butler's Last Day. Chapter 1, The Farewell Gala. The invitation had come on heavy ivory paper, embossed with the Radcliffe family crest in shimmering gold. It was the sort of stationery one rarely saw anymore, a remnant of a more formal era. The elegant script announced that Lord and Lady Radcliffe would host a gala at their country estate to mark the retirement of their butler, Henry Alcott, after half a century of loyal service. A curious premise for a party, Jessica Fletcher thought, yet she felt compelled to attend. She had met Henry on previous visits to the Radcliffe estate, and she found him dignified, perceptive, and unusually sharp for a man who had spent his life in service. When Lady Eleanor Radcliffe followed the invitation with a personal note, "Henry admires your books and insisted you be present," Jessica's decision was made. On the evening of the gala, Radcliffe Manor rose before her in stately silhouette. The drive wound through ancient oaks, and the glow of lanterns traced the outline of the great house. Dozens of cars lined the approach, their polished bodies gleaming like jewels in the dusk. Jessica, dressed in a simple but elegant navy gown, was struck at once by the hush of anticipation that seemed to cling to the air, as though the gathering carried weight beyond celebration. Inside, the ballroom dazzled with light. A massive chandelier scattered prisms across polished marble floors. Musicians played a waltz that threaded through the conversations of finely dressed guests. Silver trays of champagne moved gracefully from hand to hand, carried by younger footmen who, Jessica guessed, felt the pressure of stepping into the shoes Henry would soon vacate. "Mrs. Fletcher, how delightful," Lady Eleanor greeted warmly, her pale silk gown catching the candlelight. She was gracious as ever, though her eyes seemed to hold a shadow. "Henry will be so pleased. He always said you notice the details others overlook." Jessica smiled. "Henry has always struck me as a man of extraordinary perception himself. I'm honored he thought of me." From across the room, Lord Radcliffe stood apart, tall and commanding in his 70s, his expression set in stone. A glass of deep claret rested in his long fingers as he conferred in low tones with his solicitor, Charles Whitcomb, a narrow-shouldered man whose spectacles caught the light. Radcliffe's gaze drifted often toward the butler, and each time Jessica noticed a faint hardening in his eyes. Henry Alcott, however, seemed untroubled by his master's scrutiny. Standing at the center of the ballroom, he was the picture of poise in a black suit that fit as if tailored for this very evening. His hair was silver, his bearing erect, and though time had etched lines into his face, he possessed the quiet authority of a man who had seen much and said little. Guests flocked to him, offering congratulations, reminiscences, and reluctant farewells. He received them all with a courteous nod, but Jessica, watching from a distance, thought she glimpsed a weight behind his composure, as though he were carrying not just memories but burdens. The speeches began after dinner. Lady Eleanor spoke first, her words gracious, her voice trembling with genuine gratitude. A ripple of sympathy passed through the crowd. Then Lord Radcliffe stepped forward, his tall frame commanding silence. "Henry has been a fixture in this household," he declared, his tone formal, almost grudging. "His loyalty is appreciated. We wish him well." His words, devoid of warmth, left many glancing at one another in surprise. At last, Henry himself spoke. He placed both hands lightly on the podium, his voice calm and clear. "It has been my privilege to serve this house," he said. "I have witnessed generations come and go, joys and sorrows alike. Tonight, I step into retirement with gratitude. Yet I would be dishonest if I did not confess, there are memories I leave behind that I do not wish to carry further. Some things are best unspoken, though they weigh heavily." A stillness fell. Jessica's instincts stirred. She had heard veiled confessions before, disguised as pleasantries. A butler's duty was silence, but Henry's words hinted at secrets long suppressed. When the applause came, it was hesitant at first, then swelled into polite approval. The music resumed, conversation fluttered, and soon laughter filled the room once more. Yet Jessica noticed the unease that lingered in certain faces. Lord Radcliffe's mouth was tight, Whitcomb's expression guarded, and Lady Eleanor's smile trembled at the edges. As midnight approached, guests began to drift away, chauffeured cars sweeping down the drive into the cool night. Jessica, reluctant to depart too soon, lingered near a side corridor, intending to thank Henry personally before leaving. But when she inquired after him, no one seemed to know where he had gone. A footman whispered that he had last been seen moving toward the study wing. Another said he might have retired early. Uneasy, Jessica walked a few steps down the corridor but found only silence. Moments later, a young footman burst into the ballroom, pale as parchment. His voice broke as he stammered, "My lord, he's in the study. Dead." The music halted, glasses clattered to the floor, and a collective gasp rippled through the guests. Lady Eleanor shrieked, and Whitcomb hurried forward. Lord Radcliffe had been found in his private study, slumped at his desk, a half-drained glass of claret beside him. His face was gray, his lips tinged with blue. In the chaos that followed, shouts for doctors, screams from servants, guests clutching one another in panic, Jessica's mind worked with practiced precision. She pressed forward, calming Lady Eleanor, instructing the staff to summon the authorities. Her gaze swept the scene, noting the overturned chair, the glass at Radcliffe's elbow, the faint scent of almonds rising from the decanter. Poison. But one detail unsettled her most of all: Henry Alcott was nowhere to be found. The gala intended to honor his last day of service had instead become the scene of his master's murder. And Jessica Fletcher, by fate or by Henry's own design, was present to uncover whether the loyal butler had fled in guilt, or been made a scapegoat for a secret far darker than anyone had yet admitted. Chapter 2: The Empty Room. The shock of Lord Radcliffe's sudden death reverberated through the great house like a tolling bell. Guests huddled together in hushed panic, their finery reduced to a blur of frightened faces. Servants ran with frantic energy, some fetching water, others clutching handkerchiefs to their mouths. Jessica Fletcher, accustomed as she was to moments when tragedy intruded on civility, stepped forward with quiet authority. "Please," she urged, "we must keep calm. Someone should telephone the local constable at once. Until they arrive, no one must disturb the study further." The footman who had discovered the body nodded shakily and dashed away to make the call. Lady Eleanor, trembling, clung to Jessica's arm, whispering, "This cannot be happening, not tonight, not here." Her grief seemed genuine, yet beneath it lay a strange undertone: relief, fear, or perhaps both. Jessica could not be certain. The study itself, when she entered under protest from Whitcomb, revealed its tale in fragments. A massive oak desk dominated the room, covered in neat stacks of correspondence and ledgers. Lord Radcliffe's body slumped forward, one arm flung across the polished surface. The glass of claret still stood near his hand, the ruby liquid reflecting the lamplight. Jessica bent close and inhaled cautiously. The bitter almond scent she had detected before lingered unmistakably. Cyanide, swift, cruel, and impossible to disguise. The constable, Inspector Miles Harper, arrived within the hour, a stocky man with weathered features and a careful manner. He greeted Jessica with deference. He knew her reputation well. "Mrs. Fletcher, I see you've already got a sense of the matter," he remarked gravely as they stood near the body. "I won't pretend not to value your eye." "Thank you," Inspector," Jessica replied. "I believe Lord Radcliffe was poisoned. The question is whether the dose was administered by his own hand or another's." Harper gestured to the butler's absence. "And yet the man of honor tonight, Henry Alcott, has disappeared. What do you make of that?" Jessica considered carefully. "Suspicious, certainly. But also too convenient. A faithful servant of 50 years, absent at the precise moment of his master's death? Either Henry is guilty or someone intends us to believe he is." Together they examined the room. No signs of forced entry marred the windows. The door latch was intact. On the desk, a blotter bore the faint impression of words written hastily. Jessica traced them with a pencil. "Settled tonight." The fragment intrigued her. Settled what? A debt? A quarrel? A silence? She made a mental note. The inspector ordered the body removed discreetly, though whispers had already spread through the house. Guests muttered darkly about scandal, and some pressed to leave. Harper allowed them to go only after recording names and addresses. "No one is above suspicion," he muttered. Jessica agreed, though she watched certain departures more keenly than others. Charles Whitcomb left stiff-faced, refusing to meet her gaze, while Lady Eleanor retired upstairs under escort, pale as ivory. By dawn, the manor had fallen into uneasy quiet. Jessica remained, compelled by instinct and perhaps by Henry's own strange request for her presence. She walked the servants' wing with Harper, lantern light flickering against stone walls. Henry's quarters lay at the end of a narrow corridor. When the inspector pushed open the door, the room within appeared curiously bare. His modest possessions were neatly packed into a trunk at the foot of the bed. Uniforms hung in orderly rows. On the bedside table sat a pocket watch, its silver case polished to a shine, and beside it, a sealed envelope bearing the words, "For whom it may concern." Harper broke the seal and read aloud, "When one serves, one also sees. I have seen too much. If I am absent when questions are asked, it is not cowardice but necessity. Do not assume guilt too swiftly. The truth lies where power hides." Jessica felt a chill at the phrasing. Henry had anticipated the very suspicion now swirling around him. "This sounds less like a confession and more like a warning," she said. "Or a ruse," Harper countered. "A clever way to cloak flight in mystery." Jessica examined the room more closely. Nothing suggested a man fleeing in haste. His trunk was closed but not taken. His watch, likely of sentimental value, was left behind. "People who run rarely leave their most personal items," she observed. Whatever his reasons, Henry did not expect to vanish permanently. The inspector frowned but made notes. "We'll circulate his description at once. If he tries to leave the county, we'll know." As dawn painted the windows with pale light, Jessica returned to the study once more. She walked the perimeter slowly, letting her eyes drift over bookshelves, decanters, rugs. Something nagged at her. On the drinks cabinet, 3 glasses stood clean, yet only one bore fresh claret. Why set out 3 if only one would be used? She filed the thought away. By mid-morning, the coroner confirmed cyanide as cause of death. Harper declared it murder, though he would not name suspects. Gossip, however, spread faster than fact. Staff whispered that Henry had been seen arguing quietly with Lord Radcliffe earlier that week. Guests remembered his cryptic words during the speech, burdens best left unspoken. To many, the butler's disappearance sealed his guilt. But Jessica remained unconvinced. She sought out Lady Eleanor in her private sitting room, where the widow sat in a high-backed chair, hands clasped tightly. "Mrs. Fletcher," Eleanor said faintly, "do you think Henry capable of such a crime?" Jessica hesitated. Capable? Perhaps, all people are, under pressure. But guilty? That is far from clear. Did your husband quarrel with Henry recently? Eleanor's eyes flickered. My husband quarreled with everyone. He was not a kind man. Henry bore the brunt of his moods for years. Yet he endured with dignity. She paused, lowering her voice. If Henry vanished, I fear it was not to escape justice but to protect someone else. Jessica studied her face. Protect whom? But Eleanor pressed her lips shut, unwilling to say more. Later, in the quiet library, Jessica sorted her notes. The puzzle pieces formed no picture yet: the poisonous claret, the missing butler, the cryptic letter, the "settled tonight" scrawl on the blotter. She thought of Henry's steady gaze during his speech, the peculiar weight in his tone. It was as if he had anticipated the storm and stepped aside, knowing the lightning would fall. Outside, the grounds of Radcliffe Manor stretched wide and shadowed, concealing answers as surely as they concealed paths. Jessica knew one thing with certainty: Henry Alcott's story was far from over. The truth of Lord Radcliffe's murder lay hidden, waiting, and she intended to draw it into the light, whether Henry was a fugitive, a victim, or the keeper of a secret so dangerous it had claimed his master's life. Chapter 3: The Ledger of Secrets. Morning at Radcliffe Manor was heavy with unease. Servants whispered in corners, dusters idle in their hands, while guests who had remained overnight prepared to depart under Inspector Harper's watchful eye. The great house, once vibrant with music and chatter, now carried only the echo of tragedy. Jessica Fletcher sat at the long breakfast table, a pot of tea cooling beside her, her notebook open. She had slept little, her mind replaying Henry Alcott's cryptic farewell speech and the strange circumstances of Lord Radcliffe's death. After the constabulary finished their preliminary interviews, Harper asked Jessica to join him in the study. "There's something here you should see," he said in a low voice. The heavy curtains were drawn back, revealing gray light over the gardens. On the desk, where the coroner had removed Radcliffe's body hours before, lay a neat pile of ledgers. At first glance they appeared to be ordinary household accounts, records of staff wages, deliveries of wine, and repairs to the roof. But one slim black book, its cover worn at the edges, drew attention. "This wasn't in plain sight last night," Harper remarked. "One of my men found it in a locked drawer. And it wasn't Radcliffe's handwriting inside. Take a look." Jessica adjusted her glasses and opened the ledger carefully. The pages were filled with Henry Alcott's precise script. Columns of names stretched down the margins, beside them figures in pounds and shillings. Each entry was brief, yet suggestive: Mrs. D. 50, silence regarding summer incident. Another read, Gardener's boy, 10, discretion over broken vase. Most striking were larger sums attached to initials, accompanied by words like hush, agreement, or keep quiet. "This isn't an account book," Jessica said, voice steady. "It's a ledger of payments, hush money. Henry was recording what looks like years of secret disbursements." Harper scowled. But who was paying whom? Did Henry dole out these sums on Radcliffe's orders, or was he running his own scheme? Jessica turned the pages slowly, studying the pattern. Many entries spanned decades. The sums varied widely, from small amounts for staff to substantial figures for outsiders. Henry, as butler, controlled much of the household's daily finances. He could have been the one distributing these payments, perhaps on Radcliffe's instruction. But the notations suggest more than routine management. He wrote them in his own hand, and he was careful to record the reason behind each. That hints at a man keeping evidence, perhaps insurance. Harper nodded grimly. If so, it gave him motive. Knowledge is power, Mrs. Fletcher, and in this case perhaps fatal power. Jessica considered. Or it gave someone else motive to silence him, or frame him. They examined specific entries. One, dated 2 months prior, caught Jessica's eye, CW, 300, agreement over documents. She frowned. CW must be Charles Whitcomb, the solicitor. And £300 is no trivial sum. Harper muttered, Whitcomb was Radcliffe's closest advisor. If Henry knew of some document worth paying to suppress, he left the thought unfinished. Another entry, marked only with the letter E, recorded a payment of £100 to keep peace. Jessica wondered if E referred to Lady Eleanor. Could Henry have been paying her for silence over some domestic matter? Or protecting her from exposure? The possibilities fanned outward. Later that day, Jessica requested a quiet word with Mrs. Porter, the long-serving housekeeper. The woman, stout and sharp-eyed, wrung her apron as she spoke. Henry was the soul of discretion, ma'am. But yes, he kept that little black book. Said it helped him remember what was owed and to whom. I never pried, but I suspected it was more than just accounts. He had a way of keeping order by knowing everyone's secrets. Did Lord Radcliffe know? Jessica asked. Mrs. Porter hesitated. His lordship knew of everything in his house, or thought he did. But Henry was clever. He saw things the master overlooked. Many times I wondered if Henry was the true keeper of this place. Jessica thanked her, her mind turning. A ledger of secrets could indeed make Henry dangerous. Yet it also made him vulnerable. Anyone who feared exposure would have reason to ensure he never revealed what he knew. In the afternoon, Jessica took a walk through the estate gardens. The autumn air carried the scent of damp leaves. Her thoughts returned to Henry's farewell words, some things are best unspoken, though they weigh heavily. He had not merely been retiring, he had been releasing himself from decades of silent knowledge. Perhaps the gala had forced matters to a breaking point. Perhaps Radcliffe's murder was the inevitable result of truths long buried. When she returned inside, Inspector Harper was questioning Whitcomb in the library. Jessica listened quietly from a chair near the fire. The solicitor's thin lips tightened as Harper asked about financial disputes. Lord Radcliffe had business interests, yes, Whitcomb admitted reluctantly. He invested unwisely of late. But Henry's name does not belong in these matters. He was merely a servant. Servants see a great deal, Jessica interjected softly. Whitcomb glanced at her with irritation. For instance, Mr. Whitcomb, how do you explain an entry in Henry's hand, £300, marked with your initials? Whitcomb stiffened. Nonsense. I know nothing of it. I paid no bribes. No, Jessica said evenly, but perhaps you received one. Or perhaps Henry, fearing scandal, noted an arrangement between you and Radcliffe himself. It's important you clarify. Whitcomb's eyes narrowed, but he offered no further explanation. Harper pressed him, but the solicitor clammed up, declaring he would speak only in formal interview. The exchange only deepened Jessica's suspicions. That night, Jessica returned to her guest room restless. She spread her notes across the desk, tracing connections. Henry's ledger was not merely a diary of payments, it was a map of the household's hidden tensions. Each name represented potential conflict. Each sum hinted at wrongdoing concealed. The question was whether Henry had used it as leverage or whether others feared he might. At length, Jessica rose and gazed out the window at the moonlit grounds. Somewhere beyond the trees, perhaps, Henry Alcott was hiding. Was he running from guilt, or had he disappeared to shield someone he cared for? The envelope he had left behind suggested conscience, not cowardice. Yet the ledger, damning as it appeared, painted him as keeper of dangerous secrets. The mystery deepened. Lord Radcliffe lay poisoned, Henry was missing, and the book of hush money exposed a web of hidden betrayals. Jessica knew she was only at the beginning. The truth was entangled not in a single act of malice but in years of silent bargains. And as she closed the ledger for the night, she felt certain, the next step would be to uncover who among Radcliffe's household feared Henry's knowledge enough to kill. Chapter 4. Suspects and Shadows. The investigation widened with the morning sun. Radcliffe Manor, usually a house of rituals and schedules, had become a place of unease. Staff moved stiffly about their duties, avoiding eye contact with guests. Those who remained after the tragedy, chiefly family members and close advisors, gathered in small knots of strained conversation. Jessica Fletcher, notebook in hand, walked among them with a calm attentiveness. She had learned long ago that truth hid not in formal statements but in stray remarks, in glances, in the tremor of a voice. Inspector Harper convened the household in the drawing room, where portraits of long-dead Radcliffes glared down from ornate frames. He announced plainly, "Lord Radcliffe's death is murder. Until further notice, no one is to leave the estate. Each of you will answer questions." Gasps followed, though none dared protest aloud. Harper's authority was absolute, but it was Jessica's quiet observation that began to unravel the tapestry of motives. The first she spoke with was Charles Whitcomb, still bristling from their earlier exchange. He sat stiff-backed, his thin fingers worrying the rim of a teacup. "You've been Radcliffe's solicitor for decades," Jessica began. "You must know more of his affairs than anyone else." Whitcomb adjusted his spectacles. "I handled his contracts, yes. Investments, estate matters, tenants' leases. Nothing unusual." And yet, Jessica pressed gently, his finances were faltering. "The hush money ledger shows a payment marked with your initials. If that is not unusual, I wonder what would be." The solicitor flushed. Alcott was an old man meddling where he didn't belong. "That book means nothing. And I had no reason to wish Radcliffe dead, my livelihood depended on him." Jessica noted the defensiveness. A man hiding guilt often over-protested. Yet motive alone was not proof. Next, she turned her attention to Lady Eleanor. The widow sat near the fire, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. Grief etched her features, but beneath it Jessica sensed another emotion, perhaps relief, perhaps fear. "Lady Eleanor," Jessica said softly, "I understand this is difficult. But was there quarrel between your husband and Henry?" Eleanor's eyes lowered. "My husband quarreled with everyone. Henry endured more than most. He was my confidant at times, though he never betrayed his duty." After a pause she added, "If Henry left, it was not to escape blame but to shield someone dear. He was loyal to a fault." Jessica studied her face. "Shield whom, Lady Eleanor?" But Eleanor fell silent, her lips pressed shut, refusing further answer. Later, Jessica sought out the Radcliffe heir, Edward, Lord Radcliffe's estranged son. Edward had arrived late to the gala, his entrance marked by a swagger that hinted at both charm and arrogance. He now lounged in the smoking room, a glass of whiskey in hand despite the early hour. His features bore the family stamp but softened with a rakish ease. "You and your father were not on good terms," Jessica began. Edward gave a short laugh. "That's one way to put it. He disowned me when I refused to run the estate. I chose investments in London instead, which he called speculation. And when those investments soured, he mocked me. We hadn't spoken civilly in years. Yet you came to his gala," Jessica noted. Edward's smile faltered. "Mother asked me. She hoped for reconciliation. Perhaps Henry hoped for it too. He always tried to mend fences." Jessica tilted her head. "You seem fond of Henry." "Fond, yes," Edward admitted. "He scolded me like a schoolboy, but he was fair. If you're asking whether I poisoned father, I didn't. Though I can't say the thought never crossed my mind." His candor startled Jessica, but his eyes held weary honesty rather than deceit. Still, she marked him as a man whose bitterness might yet conceal darker impulses. Among the servants, Jessica found layers of resentment. The footman who discovered the body, young Thomas, confessed nervously that Henry had given him stern warnings about debts to local gamblers. "He knew everything, ma'am," Thomas whispered. "Even things I never told anyone." It was uncanny. Jessica noted again how Henry's knowledge, while protective, also made him dangerous. The cook, Mrs. Havers, offered another angle. Henry kept the household running, but he wasn't above threats. If someone crossed him, he'd remind them how much he knew. He was loyal, yes, but sharp-tongued when pressed. In the stables, Jessica spoke with Alan Price, the groom. His voice was low, conspiratorial. Henry was meeting someone the night before the gala. Out by the old gatehouse. I saw a lantern flicker, two figures talking. Couldn't see who. When I asked him about it later, he said some secrets weren't mine to know. Jessica's pulse quickened. If Henry met someone in secret before the murder, that meeting could hold the key. By evening, she sat once more with Harper to compare notes. "We have a ledger that implicates many, a widow who hints Henry protected her, a son who resented his father, a solicitor tied to hush payments, and staff wary of Henry's knowledge," she summarized. "Each shadow conceals motive." Harper rubbed his jaw. "And Henry himself? If he fled, doesn't that make him prime suspect?" Jessica shook her head. "Or the perfect scapegoat. Consider, Henry leaves behind his watch, his trunk, even a farewell note urging us not to assume guilt. That is not a man absconding in fear. That is a man drawn into something larger." The inspector sighed. "Then where is he?" "That," Jessica replied, "is the question we must answer before someone else ensures he never speaks again." That night, Jessica walked the silent corridors of Radcliffe Manor. Portraits glowered from the walls, shadows pooled in corners, and the weight of secrets pressed against the air. Each suspect she had spoken with carried guilt of some kind, financial, emotional, or moral. But guilt did not equal murder. Somewhere among them lay the hand that poured poison into Lord Radcliffe's glass. She paused outside the study door once more. On the blotter lay the faint words she had traced earlier, "Settled tonight." Perhaps Henry had been the one to write them. Perhaps Lord Radcliffe himself. Whoever wrote those words had anticipated a reckoning. Jessica closed her notebook, her resolve firm. She would uncover not just who killed Lord Radcliffe but why Henry Alcott vanished. For the truth was not merely about one death, it was about the power of secrets, the shadows cast by service, and the loyalties that bound this house tighter than chains. And Jessica knew from long experience, shadows always conceal more than one figure. Chapter 5, Clues in the Servants' Hall. The servants' quarters at Radcliffe Manor were a world apart from the glittering state-rooms above. Jessica Fletcher descended the narrow back staircase one gray morning, the stone steps worn smooth by decades of quiet footfalls. The air smelled faintly of polish and coal smoke. Down here, truth seemed more likely to emerge. Servants knew the rhythms of the house. They noticed who slipped through corridors at odd hours, who spoke in whispers, who concealed more than their station demanded. Inspector Harper, though diligent, gave little thought to these rooms. He focused on family and advisors, leaving the servants' hall to its silence. Jessica, however, understood that secrets often seeped downward, where observant eyes and careful ears could catch them. She entered the long hall where plain tables stretched beneath low rafters. Morning light filtered weakly through small windows, casting long beams across the flagstones. A few maids polished brass or folded linens, but their chatter died when Jessica appeared. She smiled gently. "I know the house has been unsettled. I also know Henry Alcott was more than your superior, he was your guide. If any of you recalls something unusual, it may help us find the truth." After hesitation, a maid named Lucy stepped forward. Her hands twisted in her apron, her young face pale. "The night before the gala," she said softly, "I saw Mr. Alcott in the hall here, speaking with Cook. They stopped when I came in. I heard only a bit, something about debts and a ledger." Jessica's ears pricked at the word ledger. "What debts?" Lucy shook her head. "I don't know, ma'am. Cook turned sharp on me, told me to mind the silver." Later, Jessica found Mrs. Havers, the cook, chopping onions in the cavernous kitchen. The woman's eyes watered, though Jessica suspected it was not only the onions. "Lucy mentioned you spoke with Henry about debts," Jessica began. Mrs. Havers stiffened. "That girl's tongue runs too fast. Henry asked whether I knew anything of Thomas's gambling. Said if it went on, trouble would follow the household. He didn't accuse me of anything. But he had a way of seeing through walls." "Did he mention a ledger?" Jessica pressed. The cook's knife paused mid-chop. "He kept notes on everything. Said if the house was to run smooth, one must remember what others preferred forgotten. I told him that kind of knowledge could get a man in trouble." Jessica thanked her and returned to the servants' hall, where she examined Henry's small writing desk, still tucked discreetly against the wall. Drawers yielded nothing more than lists of supplies and correspondence with tradesmen. But as she ran her hand beneath the underside of the drawer, her fingers brushed paper. She tugged free a folded slip, yellowed and creased. On it, written in Henry's tight hand, "If Radcliffe will not pay, others will. Debts cut deeper than loyalty. Protect the boy. Keep silence." The message chilled her. Henry had been entangled not only in household secrets but in matters reaching beyond. Which boy did he mean? Thomas, the gambler's debtor? Or Edward, Radcliffe's estranged son? Jessica carried the note to Inspector Harper. He read it twice, brow furrowing. So Alcott was threatening Radcliffe? Demanding payment? Not necessarily, Jessica replied. It reads more like a warning: debts, loyalty, protection. He may have been shielding someone, not blackmailing. Harper frowned. Or he was playing both sides. A man who keeps a ledger of hush money might have decided to profit from it. Jessica could not dismiss the possibility, yet Henry's farewell letter still resonated in her memory. Do not assume guilt too swiftly. She continued her quiet inquiries. In the laundry room, she found Mary, an older maid who had served nearly as long as Henry. Mr. Alcott was stern, but he cared for the young ones, Mary confided. When Thomas got in trouble with gamblers, Henry marched straight to them. Paid off part of the debt from his own pocket, I reckon. Said no servant of this house would be ruined if he could help it. Jessica absorbed the story. A man who used his own means to protect others did not fit the portrait of a ruthless schemer. But perhaps those payments had drawn him into dangerous company. That evening, wandering the dim servants' corridor, Jessica noticed a patch of wall where the plaster bore faint scratches. She pressed lightly and a panel shifted inward. A hidden cupboard revealed itself. Inside lay a stack of envelopes, each containing scraps of paper, IOUs, notes of promise, fragments of correspondence. Names appeared again and again, local tradesmen, a moneylender, even the solicitor Whitcomb. The notes suggested debts Radcliffe owed but refused to settle, obligations quietly managed by Henry. Among them, one paper stood apart, a fragment of parchment marked with Radcliffe's seal. The writing, blurred but legible, read, "Settlement to be concluded upon Henry's departure." Jessica's heart quickened. Settlement of what? It aligned too closely with the blotter words, "Settle tonight." She brought the discovery to Harper, who rubbed his temples. This complicates everything. If Radcliffe meant to cut Alcott out of some settlement, maybe Henry snapped. Poisoned him in revenge. Or Radcliffe intended to renege on a promise, Jessica countered. And someone else, fearing exposure, acted first. Remember, Henry vanished. If he planned murder, why leave behind both his trunk and his watch? Why write a note practically begging us to look deeper? The inspector conceded the point reluctantly. Jessica spent the remainder of the night mapping connections in her notebook. The hush money ledger, the hidden cupboard, the cryptic note about debts. A pattern emerged. Henry had long acted as mediator between Radcliffe and others, paying quietly to keep peace, to prevent scandal, to shield those vulnerable. But such interventions bred resentment. To some he was protector, to others a dangerous man who knew too much. At midnight, Jessica wandered once more through the silent servants' hall. The tables stood empty, the air heavy. She imagined Henry here, alone, writing in his ledger, deciding which truths to bury, which debts to pay, which secrets to guard. Perhaps he had known his time was running out. Perhaps his disappearance was no escape but sacrifice. She returned to her room resolved. To solve the murder, she must untangle not only who gained from Radcliffe's death but also who feared Henry's knowledge. For the butler's last day had not been a celebration of loyalty, it had been the climax of years of bargains, threats, and silent protections. And Jessica knew with absolute certainty, the next clue lay not in ledgers or cupboards, but in the tangled hearts of those still living beneath Radcliffe's roof. Chapter 6, The Trap of Appearances. By the third day, Inspector Harper was growing impatient. His men had scoured the countryside with no trace of Henry Alcott. Villagers reported nothing unusual save for gossip. Some swore they had seen a figure resembling the butler boarding a train at dawn, others insisted he was hiding in the woods. None of it could be verified. The absence itself weighed heavily, and Harper began to voice the conclusion that many whispered already: Henry was guilty, and the evidence pointed squarely to him. Jessica Fletcher, however, was far from convinced. She had encountered too many cases where surface appearances concealed deeper truths. Still, she knew the trap was tightening. If Henry did not return, the world would condemn him in absentia. She needed to examine every inconsistency. She began with the study once more. Alone in the room, she reconstructed the sequence. Lord Radcliffe, sitting at his desk, a glass of claret before him. Poison introduced, but how? The decanter contained traces of cyanide, which meant it was tampered with earlier, not in front of him. Henry, as butler, might have poured the glass. Yet the timing was odd. Witnesses had seen Radcliffe with wine long before the speeches began, sipping intermittently. Why, then, did the poison act only later in the night? Unless it had been introduced into a fresh glass poured closer to midnight. Jessica leaned closer to the drinks cabinet. 3 glasses stood there, 2 spotless, 1 faintly smudged as though rinsed quickly. "Why 3?" she murmured. Only 1 was ever spoken of. She scribbled a note. Someone else shared a drink with Radcliffe, unseen. If Henry had brought a 2nd or 3rd glass, it suggested company in the study before the death. That might explain why Harper's constables found faint traces of perfume on the chair opposite the desk, a detail most had dismissed as irrelevant. Next, Jessica sought Lady Eleanor. She found her in the morning room, staring out over the gardens. "Forgive me," Jessica said gently, "but were you with your husband in the study at any time before his death?" Eleanor turned sharply. "No. He rarely invited me there. It was his domain, not mine." Her answer was too quick, too rehearsed. Jessica let it pass but noted the tension in her posture. From Eleanor, Jessica went to Whitcomb. She asked directly whether he had left the gala to confer privately with Radcliffe. He grew indignant. "Certainly not. I remained in the ballroom the entire evening, speaking with the mayor and several others. If anyone suggests otherwise, it is malicious." Yet the mayor, when quietly questioned, recalled Whitcomb excusing himself for nearly half an hour during the dancing. Said he had correspondence to check, the man told Jessica. But who writes letters at a gala? Another crack in the neat story. Still, suspicion clung to Henry. He was absent. He had knowledge of poisons from years of managing household stores. His farewell speech carried hints of suppressed truths. Harper reminded Jessica of these facts repeatedly. But she focused instead on what did not fit. If Henry had murdered Radcliffe, why leave behind such incriminating records, the hush money ledger, the note about debts? A guilty man would destroy them, not preserve them. Unless, of course, someone wished to plant the appearance of guilt. That thought led Jessica back to the hidden cupboard she had discovered in the servants' corridor. She examined the scratch marks around the plaster more closely. They were fresher than she had realized. The panel had been forced open recently, perhaps the night of the gala itself. Could someone have tampered with Henry's hidden cache, leaving incriminating scraps to frame him? As she pondered this, she was interrupted by Thomas, the young footman. He looked pale and agitated. "Mrs. Fletcher," he whispered, "there's something I never said. Mr. Alcott told me, the afternoon before the gala, that if anything happened, I must remember he wasn't the enemy. He said appearances can lie. Then he pressed a coin into my hand, a sovereign, and told me to keep faith." Jessica asked to see the coin. Thomas produced it sheepishly. Scratched into the edge were the faint letters, T.A. Not Radcliffe's initials, but someone else's. Perhaps a message. Jessica's heart quickened. Henry had left behind breadcrumbs, expecting her to follow. That evening, Jessica revisited each suspect in her mind. Eleanor, evasive. Whitcomb, caught in lies. Edward, bitter, but oddly open. The servants, fearful but admiring of Henry. None of it resolved the question of motive clearly. But the ledger entries tugged at her thoughts. One in particular, CW 300, agreement over documents, loomed larger. What documents? She found Whitcomb again, cornering him in the library. You said you never left the ballroom. That was untrue. You disappeared for nearly 30 minutes. Were you in the study? He stiffened. I will not be interrogated by a novelist. Jessica's eyes were calm but sharp. Then allow me to suggest, you met Radcliffe privately. You discussed documents Henry knew of. And when Radcliffe refused to settle tonight, as he had written, you realized your position was at risk. Poison was convenient. Henry's disappearance made for a perfect scapegoat. Whitcomb's face blanched, though he masked it quickly with indignation. That is preposterous. But Jessica knew she had struck close. Later, in her room, Jessica reviewed her notes again. Patterns were forming. Every piece of evidence pointing to Henry's guilt was too neat, too obvious. The ledger left in a drawer, the incriminating scraps in the cupboard, the farewell note phrased like a prophecy. Jessica had learned over years of solving crimes that real criminals rarely wrapped their guilt so neatly. Frames, however, did. She tapped her pen against the notebook. The trap of appearances, she whispered. Someone had woven a net designed to catch Henry in suspicion, knowing his disappearance would only tighten the snare. But whether Henry fled of his own accord or was lured away remained uncertain. Sleep eluded her that night. She dreamed of the butler standing in the servants' hall, ledger in hand, saying, "I have seen too much." When she woke before dawn, the conviction was firm in her mind. Henry was not the killer. He was the witness, and someone else had made sure his silence served their needs. The question was no longer whether Henry was guilty, but whether she could find him before the true culprit tightened the noose entirely. Chapter 7, The Final Revelation. By the fourth evening, Inspector Harper was ready to conclude the case. Alcott has vanished, the ledger condemns him, and his words at the gala sound like confession, he declared to Jessica in the dimly lit study. I'll circulate a warrant. Once he is found, we'll have our man. Jessica, standing by the hearth, shook her head. You'll have a man, Inspector, but not the right one. Henry was clever, but not cruel. This murder was designed to make him appear guilty. Look closer, the evidence is arranged too perfectly. Harper frowned. Then who? You've spoken with them all. You've seen their motives. But motive is not proof. Proof is in patterns, Jessica replied softly. And in contradictions. She turned toward the desk, still scarred by the drama of the murder. Lord Radcliffe's glass contained cyanide. Yet the poison wasn't present in his earlier drinks. That means it was added later, from this very decanter. She touched the crystal bottle with a gloved finger. Only someone trusted, or bold enough to enter unseen, could tamper with it. Harper muttered, which brings us back to Alcott. Unless, Jessica countered, the butler had already vanished before the final glass was poured. She requested that the household gather in the drawing room. Reluctantly, Harper agreed. Soon, family, staff, and Whitcomb assembled beneath the stern portraits of ancestors. Faces pale, eyes wary. Jessica felt the familiar gravity of such moments, the hush before revelation, when truth pressed against silence, demanding release. She began calmly. We are told Henry Alcott poisoned his master. He left behind incriminating records, a farewell letter, and then disappeared. Convenient, is it not? Too convenient. If Henry were guilty, why not burn the ledger? Why not destroy the notes in the cupboard? Why not conceal the very documents that could expose him? No, ladies and gentlemen, someone else placed them where they would be found. Murmurs rippled. Lady Eleanor's hand trembled at her side. Edward Radcliffe leaned forward, brow furrowed. Whitcomb folded his arms, defensive. Jessica continued, the study revealed 3 glasses, not 1. That means Lord Radcliffe was not alone before he died. And faint traces of perfume lingered on the chair opposite. So, who met him in secret that night? Whitcomb interjected quickly. Speculation. Anyone could have. Indeed, Jessica said sharply, but not anyone had reason. Consider the ledger entry, CW, 300, agreement over documents. Charles Whitcomb, your initials. You admitted nothing of this when asked. Yet the mayor recalls you vanishing from the ballroom for nearly half an hour. Where were you, if not here, with your employer? All eyes turned to the solicitor. His face flushed, but he forced composure. I deny it. I was merely. Jessica pressed on. The ledger shows years of hush payments. Many small, some large. Henry recorded them, not for gain, but for protection. He was the house's silent guardian. But you, Mr. Whitcomb, saw in that ledger a threat. If Henry revealed your dealings, documents perhaps illegal, perhaps fraudulent, your career and reputation would crumble. Lord Radcliffe, too, may have tired of shielding you. His blotter bore the words, settled tonight. He planned to confront you. And you, desperate, saw only one escape. Gasps broke the silence. Edward muttered, good Lord. Lady Eleanor covered her mouth. Whitcomb stood, voice rising. Preposterous. You have no proof. Jessica's voice cut clean through his protest. The proof lies in the decanter. Radcliffe's last glass was poured late, after Henry vanished. You, Mr. Whitcomb, were seen leaving the ballroom. You had time. You had access. And you had motive stronger than any servant, self-preservation. The solicitor's eyes darted, seeking support, finding none. Jessica continued, gentler now. Henry knew. He left that cryptic farewell note because he expected suspicion to fall upon him. Perhaps he thought vanishing would buy time for truth to emerge. He trusted that someone would see past the trap of appearances. That someone was meant to be me. For a moment, silence reigned. Then Lady Eleanor whispered, Henry protected us all. Edward stood abruptly. And father protected Whitcomb, until it no longer suited him. That's why you killed him, isn't it? Because the bargain ended. Whitcomb's composure cracked. His shoulders slumped. He did not confess outright, but his silence was as heavy as admission. Inspector Harper stepped forward, eyes stern. Mr. Whitcomb, you'll come with me. As the solicitor was led away, Jessica felt the tension in the room shift. Fear gave way to sorrow, and sorrow to relief. Lady Eleanor sank into a chair, whispering prayers. Edward stared at the fire, expression unreadable. The servants exchanged glances of vindication. Henry's name, at least, was spared dishonor. Yet Jessica could not rest easy. The true culprit was in custody, yes. But Henry Alcott remained missing, his fate unknown. Where are you, Henry? She murmured inwardly. And why vanish if not to shield another secret still hidden? Later that night, Jessica wandered alone through the darkened halls. She paused in the servants' corridor once more, running her hand along the plaster where the cupboard had been found. Shadows whispered around her. Henry's absence loomed larger than ever. She remembered Thomas's sovereign, scratched with initials. A message yet unsolved. She whispered to herself, one revelation always leads to another. Whitcomb killed Radcliffe, yes. But Henry, what did you know that still frightens you into hiding? Jessica returned to her room, mind alive with questions. The case was not finished. The solicitor's guilt explained the murder, but not the butler's last day. The truth, she suspected, was more layered. Whitcomb had acted in desperation, but Henry's disappearance hinted at something older, deeper, tied to Radcliffe's past and the web of debts woven into the household. For now, justice had been served. But Jessica knew the story's final chapter still waited in the shadows, and when it came, Henry's voice would be heard, one way or another. Chapter 8, The Butler's Last Day. The arrest of Charles Whitcomb quieted the storm at Radcliffe Manor, but only outwardly. The solicitor's guilt explained the poisoned glass, his motive rooted in desperation. Yet to Jessica Fletcher, the case still felt unfinished. The question that lingered was not merely who had killed Lord Radcliffe, but why Henry Alcott had vanished. 2 days after Whitcomb's removal, Jessica rose early and walked the frost-glittered gardens. The manor loomed somber in the pale morning light. Servants moved carefully, their voices subdued. Lady Eleanor had withdrawn into mourning. Edward was busy handling affairs of the estate. Jessica wandered toward the old gatehouse, remembering Alan the groom's words about a secret meeting there on the eve of the gala. The building stood in partial ruin, ivy clinging to its stone walls. Inside, dust motes danced in the sunlight. On the floor lay a lantern, its glass cracked. Beside it, half hidden under a plank, Jessica found an envelope. It bore Henry's tidy script, "For Jessica Fletcher." Her heart quickened as she opened it. The letter inside read, "I could not remain, knowing what must come. Radcliffe's ledger was not only mine to keep, it was my safeguard, a record of truths he ordered hidden but I dared not destroy. Whitcomb was only one of many who feared exposure. Yet the darkest secret was Radcliffe's own. Decades ago, a debt was paid to conceal a scandal involving his son. I shielded them all, but the burden grew too heavy. When he declared that settlement would end upon my retirement, I knew danger loomed. To protect Lady Eleanor, to protect Edward, I stepped away. I leave the truth in your hands. You will see more clearly than I." Jessica folded the letter slowly. Henry had not fled in guilt but in sacrifice, retreating so that suspicion might rest on him rather than on those he had vowed to shield. His silence was his last act of service. She returned to the manor and asked to see Edward privately. In the library, she showed him the letter. His face paled as he read. "Scandal involving me," he whispered. "What does he mean?" Jessica studied him carefully. "Henry refers to debts paid decades ago. Perhaps not your doing, but tied to your name. Is there something in your past, or your youth, that your father might have wanted concealed?" Edward's jaw tightened. "When I was barely 19, I fell into ruinous debt, cards, wagers, foolishness. Father swore it would remain secret. He made Henry pay some creditors. Later, there was an incident with a young woman. Accusations. It might have destroyed me if it had reached the courts. Henry handled it quietly. I thought it forgotten." Jessica said gently, "Henry carried the burden for you all these years. Your father used it to control you, and Whitcomb saw it as leverage too. Henry vanished so that you would not be dragged into the scandal with Whitcomb's arrest. Edward covered his face with his hands. He sacrificed his honor to protect mine. And I did nothing for him. Jessica laid a hand on his arm. Perhaps you can do something still. Clear his name. Tell the truth. Later that day, she spoke with Lady Eleanor. The widow listened silently, tears sliding down her cheeks. Henry saved this family more times than I can count, Eleanor whispered. He deserved gratitude, not suspicion. I feared, when he disappeared, that he had been killed. But knowing he chose to leave, to protect us, it is both comfort and sorrow. Inspector Harper, though reluctant, accepted Jessica's conclusion. So the butler was no murderer but the last true guardian of this house, he conceded. We'll circulate word differently now, not a warrant for his arrest, but a request for his safety. Whether he returns is his choice. Days passed. Whitcomb faced formal charges, his schemes laid bare. The scandal Edward feared never surfaced. Jessica ensured the relevant passages of the ledger remained sealed, shared only with Harper. Yet Henry did not return. His whereabouts remained a mystery, his absence the final act of a life defined by discretion. On her last evening at Radcliffe Manor, Jessica walked once more through the servants' hall. The long tables stood empty, shadows pooling in the corners. She imagined Henry there, pen scratching across the pages of his ledger, shoulders bowed under invisible weight. She spoke softly, as if he might hear, "You did not fail. You carried more than anyone had a right to ask." As she prepared to leave the next morning, Lady Eleanor pressed a small parcel into Jessica's hands. "Henry left this for you with the vicar weeks ago." The vicar brought it only today. Inside lay Henry's silver pocket watch, the one left behind in his quarters. On its inner lid, engraved words gleamed, "Loyalty is the last gift." Jessica felt a lump rise in her throat. The watch was not only a token of trust but a farewell. Henry had chosen his own disappearance as his last act, ensuring others could go on. On the train back to Cabot Cove, Jessica wrote her notes into a story. Not the sensational tale the papers might print, but one that honored the truth, a butler who, after 50 years of service, carried secrets heavy enough to crush lesser men, and who vanished not in shame but in sacrifice. She ended her account with reflection. Loyalty takes many forms. Some use it as a weapon, others as a shield. Henry Alcott wielded it as both, protecting a family that seldom deserved him. In the end, his last day was not retirement but deliverance, a step into silence so that others might continue in peace. Perhaps that is the noblest service of all. As the countryside blurred past her window, Jessica felt both sorrow and gratitude. The mystery of Lord Radcliffe's death was solved, justice served. Yet the greater mystery of Henry Alcott's fate lingered, unsolved, like a final page left blank. Some truths, she knew, were not meant to be written. But in her heart, she hoped Henry had found freedom at last, somewhere beyond the weight of ledgers, secrets, and service. His last day as a butler had become his first day as a man released.